Today on the show, scientific proof that you and I are right about people. Plus, because you wanted it, we dig into the idea of a Howard Schultz presidency.
Welcome to the future, where the glass is half full and you'll need new glasses, where you'll be jumping from conclusions.
The past is annulled, and a new future is born.
Never before in history has so much meant so little to so many.
You know, I'm going to preface what I'm about to tell you by saying I am not a doctor. I'm not a scientist. I did not do well in science in grade school, middle school, or high school. Well, I did okay with biology, but anything that involved chemicals or an equation or anything of that nature, not my forte. I suck at math, and any science-related math I seem to suck twice as hard at. And you know what? It sort of makes me the black sheep of my family. Everybody in my family is either a lawyer or a scientist. Like, I go to family reunions and holidays, and what are you doing? Well, you know, graphing radio waves, part of my astrophysics thing. Yeah. Oh, what are you doing? Well, you know, sort of, there's some new interesting fiscal ramifications to some of the rules governing Wall Street, and so me and my firm are really digging into that. What are you doing? I'm making fart jokes on the radio. So there's probably nobody that is more aware than I am that when it comes to science and scientific results of studies and the interpretations of them, I am not qualified to hand this stuff out to you or make sense of data, figures, and numbers. But this particular bit of research out of, where was it? The University of Bath in England spoke to me to the point where I just felt I had to run and tell you about it. Just because, look, you and I talk about this all the time. You and I talk about how fear and division is, well, the best friend of everyone from preachers to politicians to radio and television news personalities. If someone can convince you that you need to be afraid of someone else and say, oh, don't walk up to them in the street, don't engage them, it'll do you no good whatsoever, just let us worry about it. If you could dig deep for a campaign donation, I will do everything I can to protect you from them. Those other people that are so different than you that you need to be scared of. A fool and his money are soon parted. Conquer after, or divide and conquer. Divide and conquer. Yeah, there you go. It's one of the basic precepts of, life and controlling others. And you know what? There's big money to be made in division and big money to be made in all of these things. So it's stuff like this that won't get shared with you by the traditional news media. What the mainstream media doesn't want you to know is stuff like this, because they're making too much money off of keeping us divided. Here's the thing, though. On this show, I love to bring all sorts of different types of people in. Have a place where we can all have a discussion. You and I have talked about this a lot. What do we want? We all want basically the same stuff. We want to have a roof over our heads. We would like to have work. It would be great if that work was in some way, shape, or form meaningful to us. If we have kids, we want our kids to have a shot at a life, a shot at an education, all of the above. These things are universal. We all kind of want the same stuff. And, well, I'm of the belief that if we can hang out with people that are maybe folks that think differently to us and recognize that we want the same stuff, we just maybe have some different ideas about the best way to get there, we could, learn from one another and perhaps get there faster. I'm all about hanging out with people that are different than me. People that are like me, I'm surrounded by plenty of them, but I know their stories. I'm familiar with their life experiences. They're a lot like mine, and as much as sometimes it can be comforting to hang out with people that are like you, never really feels like I'm doing a tremendous amount of learning or growing when I do. So therefore, I like to make this show a place where people that think differently from one another can gather and have a chitty chat. Here's the thing, though. I had to share this with you. There's a study out of the University of Bath in England, which suggests that diverse groups around the world, literally all around the globe, share more in common in terms of their beliefs and values than polarized for money reporting often suggests. This is from a paper that I think was published at bath.ac.uk. Anyways, the study finds that people tend to grossly overestimate the difference between groups of folks. People tend to grossly overestimate the difference between folks, hoping and helping to create this narrative of division, this idea of us and them. And this us and them narrative suggested to the researchers that did this study that it's something that's been perpetuated by a whole bunch of social commentators and leapt upon by politicians to sow division. Like, I've always said this. I've always said, and I suppose this is why I wanted to share this with you. I've always said, people seek to divide us because there's great money, and then politicians do really well off of it because they can make you scared. And if you're scared, you're going to donate, you're going to vote, and all these sorts of things. And well, now there's actually a scientific study out of an accredited institution of higher learning to support what we've been talking about. So I'm kind of excited about it. This is a time when conflict and debate is rife all over the world. And I think there's comfort in knowing that other folks are going through something similar. A lot of people point at America and go, oh man, we're so divided. We're so unable to get along. We're so polarized. And well, it's the nature of the beast being the world. And you see that when you look across the pond and check out what's going on in England with the conflict and debate surrounding Brexit. They have their own form of us and them going on over there. A debate that rages unabated in the UK. And this raises some important questions about how we perceive one another, how we perceive people from other nations and backgrounds. It was published in the Journal of Personality and Social Psychology. This study drew on data from over 60 countries and 140,000 people. Pretty decent sample size. Psychologists at the University of Bath looked at people's moral beliefs, their moral belief, where their moral compass's true north was, their moral beliefs, their attitudes, including people's values surrounding the idea of equality. The idea of equality was a central theme of this study. And the research revealed that people way overestimate the differences between groups. They way overestimate how different someone else is from them. People tend to think that just because you're from a different part of the world, different part of the country, voted differently, that you are just cut from a completely different type of cloth. And they found this is absolutely not true. That when you boil it down to what's important, people's moral beliefs and attitudes toward equality specifically, we're all kind of sort of on the same page. It's just, well, politicians don't want us to know this. Makes their life harder. Good. Let's continue to make their life hard. More on this next.
Real radio.
104.1.
Where the left and right come together for fundamental truths. AD on the radio, on Twitter at ADSXE.
So like you and I have been talking about for, well, years on this show, politicians and certain figures in the media, certain news organizations, have a lot to gain by keeping us from talking to each other, have a lot to gain by keeping us scared of one another, have a lot to gain by keeping us divided. And, well, you and I have talked about it before, but it always bears repeating. We all want the same stuff. We all want a roof over our head. We all want a job. We would like for that job to be work that's meaningful to us. And if we've got kids, we want them to have a shot at a life, a shot at an education. These are the things we want. These are more or less universal. And our political differences, so-called, really just tend to come from the fact that we've got maybe some varying ideas about the best way to get to all this stuff. But if we bear in mind we're all headed toward the same thing, well, we could maybe, hang out together, have a conversation together, learn something from each other and get there faster. And this is what we've been chit-chatting about now for going on 3 years. I think that's how long the show's been on the air. I don't know. I do know this, though. It's nice to have this little theory you and I have cooked up, backed up by some hard science out of the University of Bath in England. Yes, a respected bastion of higher education has told us we are right. Yeah, how about that? This study out of the University of Bath in England was published in the Journal of Personality and Social Psychology. And the study drew on all this data. And it was a good sample size. Over 60 countries, 140,000 people. Psychologists at the University of Bath looked at people's moral beliefs. They looked at people's attitudes, including people's values surrounding the idea of equality. And, well, as it turns out, we're all a lot more like each other than maybe we previously thought. Yeah. Now, as part of this study, the researchers kind of took a fresh approach in terms of analyzing how similar or different groups of people were. And then they sort of applied this method to a bunch of different groups of folks split up by nationality, religion, age, gender, income, and education level. When politicians, when media figures seek to divide us, these are where the lines are drawn. Nationality, religion, age, gender, income, education level. And here's the thing. The study was global. Like I said, over 60 countries and 140,000 people were studied. And this research revealed that people tend to vastly overestimate the differences between groups. People vastly overestimate how different they are from another group of people. Like, we'll look at someone of a different nationality and think that there's some pretty obvious differences. We'll look at people of different religions and ages and genders and income levels and think there's no way they could possibly relate to us. We'll look at people with different educations than us and think that, well, we're not going to have that much in common. We vastly overestimate these things. It's not just the media. We're doing it to ourselves. It's not just politicians. We're doing it to ourselves, which is, I suppose, part of the reason why it's so important to take a look at this stuff. Instead, we can take a moment to highlight the more common similarities. And all of a sudden, they found, attitudes toward other people become more positive. What they found is that their attitudes and values on issues ranging from, well, all the things that we're scared of or that we want. These people from over 60 countries, 140,000 people from around the globe, when studied, their attitudes and values on things like crime, security, what is morally right and morally wrong, remarkably similar. Give you a perfect example. On average, 95% of responses given by women were mirrored by men. And on average, 80% of responses of individuals from one nation were mirrored by those from another. Men are from Mars, women are from Venus. Oh, apparently not so much. We all kind of sort of are on the same page 95% of the time. And you know what? There's a lot of people that would point a finger at those on the right and accuse them of being racist and not understanding and not open to diversity. But the people going, a perfect example. We were talking about this on the show yesterday. Beto O'Rourke went from being the hero of the Democratic Party, the great hopeful for 2020, to being destroyed for being too white, too male, and too privileged. So it exists on both sides. This creation of fictitious divides. This idea that we're that different. How could Beto O'Rourke possibly know what women want? He's too male to be an effective candidate for president and speak for us. Well, according to this study from the Institution of Higher Learning, 95% of the time, men and women are more or less on the same page. Also, like I said, they looked at different people's nationalities. Now, this was done in England, but it applies to us too. They found that the values of English people and Polish people are way more similar than often assumed. They looked at a whole bunch of social values like security, loyalty, success, open-mindedness. And this study, again, showed that there's way more overlap between these two supposedly disparate, geographically, sociologically disparate countries. There's way more overlap than people often would assume or perceive. Now, this gets a little numbery, but it's important, so I wanted to break it out. These groups, this division that we see in our own minds, say, white male, black woman. When surveyed, when asked how different the thoughts, values, perspectives of these two people were, white male, black woman, a lot of people assumed that they would be 70% different in the way they looked at the world. And when the math was done, these two people that were supposed to have so little in common, have such different life experiences, different priorities, different levels of whatever, we, the outside observer, assume that there is a 70% difference in essentially who they are. The reality, 12%. And I know it's a little numbery, but basically, if you take one thing from this, is we are a lot more alike than we think. We could be outside of a situation. We could be looking at two people going, oh, they're never going to get along. They're so different. They're from different worlds. Well, we're being short. We're being close-minded. We're not having the vision to recognize the similarities in others. It's not just to do with us. You put two people in a room, think they're never going to get along. I've got to run interference between this. This is going to be trouble at the party. And they get along great. Why? Well, because we have a lot more in common than we think. And the point of all this, I suppose, is that the people conducting the study wanted to reassure you, me, all of us, members of the public, citizens of the world, people that are being divided more every single day by politicians and the media. The idea was to remind us that, well, we've got a lot more in common than we think. And getting along, when we actually hang out in a room together, happens naturally.
For more stimulation and less irritation, 9 out of 10 doctors choose KPRC AM 950, Houston's more stimulating talk radio.
Don't get the blues, get all the news. We mean all of you guys out there in Radioland.
All aboard!
He's back. AD on the radio.
So, it's an interesting diversion, this whole Howard Schultz, former CEO of Starbucks guy, possibly running for president as an independent candidate in 2020. Do you think anything's actually going to come of it? I don't. But then, Donald Trump's presidency was the punchline to a joke for over a decade until it actually happened. So who the hell knows? It's 2019. We're coming up on 2020. All bets are off. But what I do find interesting is how the left are getting after him like he's the Antichrist, and how they're getting after him by going after Starbucks. He doesn't run that company anymore. Deciding to boycott Starbucks. I don't really know how you're sticking it to him. You could be anti him. That's fine. That is your want. It is a free country in theory. And well, if you want to oppose his potential presidency, go right ahead. But boycotting Starbucks, I don't think that's really going to send the message you're thinking it's going to send. And now Now, they're going after him because the Starbucks music store was too white under Howard Schultz. Now, you catch this? It's an interesting one. The bottom line is, I think, that Schultz must be destroyed no matter what the cost. And I don't think he's really planning on making a run at being president. He just said some outlandish stuff to hawk some books. I mean, he was on a book tour when he said he was considering running for president. That's sort of, well, that's a dividing line between people that have a genuine desire to serve the public, be a public servant that a politician is supposed to be, and the people that are just trying to make a name for themselves. If they're on a book tour and they say something outlandish, you can't take it all that seriously. But nevertheless, people are all bent out of shape about this idea that the former CEO of Starbucks, Howard Schultz, could be making a run at being president. And the bottom line is that his campaign must be taken down, and taken down now. And what better way to go after him than the whiteness of the music that was sold in Starbucks while he was running the joint? Yeah. There's a guy, white guy, by the name of Timothy Burke. And he wrote about Schultz, saying, quote, his tenure leading the Seattle Supersonics ownership group raised eyebrows when the team replaced in-arena hip-hop music with mellow jazz. Yeah. Went from hip-hop to mellow jazz. Therefore, clearly racist. I don't know. I was never at one of those Supersonics games. I was never privy to the mellow jazz that was played during Seattle Supersonics basketball. But jazz, as many musical historians will tell you, it is not white music, just because it's a little more mellow. Anyways, I digress. The piece goes on. It's interesting stuff. Starbucks, which sold music alongside coffee from the years 1994 to 2015, had what could only be described as a flat white section of tunes to offer. Oh, wordplay. Well done. This guy, Timothy Burke, who happens to be white. Yes, it was a flat white selection of tunes to offer. Over 21 years, Starbucks released and sold 262 records. A good percentage of these were compilations like Music for Little Hipsters or British Folk. The single artist albums, though, are overwhelmingly from white musicians. This is according to a review. I think it was in the Daily Beast. The only living black artists we could find among the 262 Starbucks releases were Herbie Hancock, Mary J. Blige, Sly and the Family Stone, Al Green, Angelique Kidjo, and jazz trio Soul Live. The music selection at Starbucks was apparently in no way, shape, or form diverse enough, because Mary J. Blige was the youngest among those, and she's 48 years old, according to this dude, Timothy Burke. Okay. So Starbucks sold music that they thought their customers would like. Apparently they weren't keeping it real in their music selection. And therefore, Howard Schultz cannot, should not, will not, under any circumstances, not on Timothy Burke's watch, be president of these United States of America. The music selection during his time where he was running Starbucks was, and I quote, painfully white. Can you believe the stones on this guy? I mean, maybe I'm missing something. Maybe I'm not looking into it in a deep enough manner. But it seems to me like a white guy just told Herbie Hancock that he wasn't black enough. Could it be? Am I oversimplifying the situation? I don't know. I do know this, though. Because the issue of Howard Schultz becoming president doesn't seem to be willing to die, let's break it down. Let's talk about what this would actually look like. There's been a lot of jokes about Venti and Grande campaign contributions. There's a lot of jokes about him trying to prove he's not a has-been. There's, politically, there are some very low-hanging pieces of comedic fruit in the Howard Schultz presidential bid. But let's for a second talk about what this is actually entailing, what it would actually look like. He said he's been toying with the idea of running for president. And he did that interview on 60 Minutes this past weekend, just gone by, where he said he is, and I quote, seriously thinking of running for president. Now, and it's funny because I asked some people this. I was like, where do you think he lies politically? I don't know, but he seems to think we don't have enough money for socialized medicine and socialized education, socialized higher education, so he's got to be on the right, right? Au contraire, lifelong Democrat. He said he's running, if he runs, as a centrist independent. And all those gags about venti or grande campaign contributions, bottom line is the guy's got like the better part of $4 billion. So he wouldn't have to go cap in hand to anyone when it came to financing his campaign if he didn't want to. Anyways, Democrats are all kinds of worried. Even though they're against the idea that he might get elected and do away with Medicare for all, the single-payer healthcare system, they think that he could hurt the Democratic chances. It's a weird divide, right? They're saying that he's more aligned with Donald Trump's ideology, but at the same time, they're worried he's going to take away from their votes. So there you go. Democrats are all kinds of worried that an independent candidate could split the vote against President Trump and hand him a second term. Schultz doesn't really care. He said, and I quote, "We have a broken political system with both parties basically in business to preserve their own ideology without a recognition and responsibility to represent the interests of the American people." Now, would he run as a Democrat? He said no. And this is part of the reason that I don't actually think that he's going to run for president. I think that he can set the cat amongst the pigeons a little bit more. He can hawk a few more books by saying that he's going to run as an independent. And you know what? He might genuinely believe what he's saying about being an independent. I mean, you and I talk about this on the show. Let me just repeat. He said, "We have a broken political system with both parties basically in business to preserve their own ideology without responsibility to represent the interests of the people." Couldn't agree more. But I don't think he actually thinks that he could win if he was going to run as an independent. He didn't get to where he is with $4 billion in the bank by not being a bit clever. So the whole "I'm going to run as an independent" thing makes me feel like he's not into it. But he did say that running as a Democrat would be disingenuous because he doesn't believe in a lot of the issues that Democrats are all fired up about. These things that we talked about: free college, universal health care, everybody gets a job. He feels as though his Democratic Party, of which he's been a lifelong registered voter, has gone way too far left. And we've seen it on both sides. Extremism on the left and the right, it doesn't spell anything good. And look, historically speaking, it's to be expected. When the world comes out of an economic downturn, people get very politically divided. Meaning, if you were right-wing before, that's not enough. You got to be extra right-wing to be able to get the votes. If you were lefty before, you got to be hard left. It's just the way it is. Politicians are trying to stay alive and play the game at this particular moment in history. But what I thought was really interesting and kind of telling was Donald Trump's reaction to the idea that Schultz said he's seriously considering a run at president. Did you see this?
Now, more AD on the radio.
So Schultz is pontificating his run at president. And look, I don't think there's anything to be concerned about here, but I keep getting tweets and emails and questions about the idea that the guy that used to run Starbucks could be president of these United States of America. The left wants to tear him down in any way that they possibly can. Boycotting Starbucks, I don't think is going to get the job done, but, you know, it's all they can come up with at the moment, so that's what they're doing. The right, not a fan either, or at least Donald Trump isn't a fan. This is the thing that I thought was kind of sort of telling. And Donald Trump, he's got that whip out your wallet and let's see who's his bigger mentality that I think a lot of these rich old folks tend to have. Like Bezos and Trump are always at each other's throats about one thing or another. And I think it's really, who's the biggest kid on the playground? Who's got the biggest wallet? And, well, Schultz is another person. Business tycoon with political aspirations. That encroaches on the Donald space a little bit too much for the Donald's liking. And you can tell that he was rattled by the whole thing because, well, he went off on Twitter. It's an interesting one. Donald Trump, I guess, like I said, feeling as though some of the social space he occupies, a politician that used to be a businessman with a whole bunch of money, got weird about it and tweeted that Schultz doesn't have the guts. And then he said something a little weird, which was he said he hopes that the Starbucks in Trump Tower is still paying rent. Again, why are people fixated on Starbucks? He's not the guy that's running the company anymore. Anyways, I don't know. Trump also went after... Schultz said this thing on 60 Minutes. He said he's not the smartest person in the room. Schultz said, I'm not the smartest person in the room. I surround myself with smart people. Trump said he agreed that Schultz isn't the smartest and said, besides, America already has that. America already has not the smartest person in the room. Me, Donald J. Maybe poor choice of words. Maybe it's just being unbelievably self-aware. I don't know. But like I said, we're going to examine this. I don't for a moment think this is actually going to happen, but it's 2019. All bets are off, and a lot of people are asking me what we think about this. So let's dig into it a little bit more. There's some more overlap between Trump and Schultz as well. Both native New Yorkers. He's from Brooklyn. And he is not a kid that was born with a silver spoon in his mouth. He, I think, was the first person in his family to graduate college. And, well, he wound up at Starbucks in the early 80s. And he kind of rode that one for a very long time. He bought the company in 87. And he basically made it what it was. Oversaw this massive Starbucks world domination effort. I think there's a Starbucks in like 80 countries around the world. I think there's like 40,000 stores, somewhere around that. Anyways, Starbucks, really freaking big. And, well, he started in the 80s, bought the company in 87, and he was the guy. He was the guy that made it what it was. But, like I said, yeah, he probably has a vested financial interest in the company now, but boycotting Starbucks is not going to hurt him. He stepped down in 2017. He stopped being CEO of Starbucks. He's got more than enough money in the bank where you deciding to get your latte elsewhere, you deciding to go to the Coffee Bean instead, is not going to put a hitch in his giddy up. And if he has any genuine aspirations to the presidency, well, I can't imagine that this is going to affect him. He has, to be fair, talked about politics for a while and said, maybe, maybe not. I mean, Donald Trump, you can go back and find old videotape of him talking about running for president in the 80s as well. Apparently, there were a lot of people telling him to be part of the Democratic primary in 2015, but he was like, yeah, no, not for me. He said, similar to what Oprah said, he felt like he could do more as a private citizen than as a politician. But that was back in 2015. He backed Clinton in 2016. And what happened since then? He got his big check. A lot of people talk about this. You get your big check. If you talk to CEOs, heads of record labels, presidents of companies, there comes a point where a lot of these folks who have had the thrill to kill, that have been getting after it over and over and over again for years and years and years, working so hard, tirelessly to create something, get a big check. They sell their company, they sell the stock in their company. All of a sudden, they've got, and they were doing very well before, but they've got untold millions, in his case, billions at their disposal. And it doesn't matter how rich you were before, it doesn't matter how much you achieved, that changes a person on a fundamental level. And, well, he got his big check in 2018 when he stepped down his chair. He went, I've got all this money. I've achieved this ridiculous level of success. And, well, I'm kind of bored. I got nothing left to do. I'm not responsible for Starbucks anymore. You start looking around, going, what could I do? I know I'll write a book. And I'll take an interest in politics. So he's been talking. He's been talking about politics. Not a fan of Trump. He has accused Trump of willfully creating chaos. And he's opposed Trump when Trump has said things like, I'm going to enforce a travel ban. He said Starbucks would hire 10,000 refugees. When the racist violence jumped off in Charlottesville, Virginia, he called on better angels to rise to the defense of others. And he went to Houston after Hurricane Harvey. He's got some time on his hands and tremendous resources. So he's written a book. He's positioned himself as the self-funded man in the middle. And a lot of people aren't thrilled about this. And you know what? I think it's healthy that he's talking about this. I don't think he's going to run for president. I don't think he would win if he ran for president. But the more we have an option, or at least the idea of an option, of a viable, independent, non-extremist candidate that does not support the idea of a broken two-party system, the more that seed gets planted in people's minds, the better off we're going to be. So as much as I think it's ridiculous that people are taking Howard Schultz seriously as a potential presidential candidate, I kind of like that he's in there, messing with the program a little bit. The program is one that desperately needs to be messed with. So even though this idea is a little ridiculous, even though people's reactions to it have been even more ridiculous, I got to tell you, I think this conversation that he started could wind up doing us a latte good. You're welcome.